Good morning, everyone. On your desk, you have the addendum, which is 2023 budget as we voted it out. Some documents that you help walk through because I think everybody is going to want to say, out of all those pages, can you tell us really what are the moving pieces? You'll notice that on the web report, which was sent out, a lot of changes. There are no changes between what the governor proposed, what the House did, and what we did. Where there will be changes, really, and then there's some language changes. So each year we attempt to extract from that very large document sort of the highlights. And this is what this document does, it should be very familiar. On the back is something that was done by the House and we decided to do, and that was the budget at a glance. And it shows unduplicated by appropriation by departments, which show a budget of 8.2 million unduplicated. So this is sort of the overview. The other part, as you may remember, we had an upgrade of revenues in January, and we had, as a result, I believe we did not spend all, and we had like 87 million of general fund, which would be one time. And so there's a document here that's titled Senate B1100 and Section D101, and it gives you where the money went, and the changes that we made in the Senate are in green. So it's a way of just helping see what action we took. Then the next document, which is stapled, is one-time general fund and ARPA. So you can see there's a lot of pieces and funding that's involved here. I would like to say that that in this budget, there are areas that I think we like priorities that we have, many of us have heard about. And first of all, we have some funding here that was not included in the governor's proposed budget. I'll give you some examples. Some were not funded at all. You may have heard from your munis and co-ops around how to get the smart metering. There was no money in the proposed budget as it came from the governor. Another area where there was a great deal of emphasis is that we all know that our mental health agencies and our designated agencies, specialized agencies, under tremendous stress. In the governor's proposed budget was a 3% increase. Those agencies came to us and said, we need much more than that. They were hoping to get 10. We were able to increase that from 3 to 8%. Each percentage point is about 2.3 million. But there's also money in here for the crisis units, mobile crisis units, which are really taking the services to where people are. So there's 8%, but there's also other funding. We also addressed the problem with court security. We heard very clearly from our court system that they were having trouble finding deputy sheriffs and availability. And there was a study that was done that showed we were not fully utilizing the state paid deputies that I believe there are 24 of them. Senator Sears, I imagine, is a little late coming in due to the weather. Probably going to take a little time coming up from Bennington this morning. And so we were looking at how we can get, as transports have declined and we're doing more arraignments remotely, that has really altered that workload, and there was a recommendation to really relook at those positions that are state paid. And so we did put in more money for court security, recognizing the higher cost of deputy sheriffs, as well as better utilization of the ones that we're already paying for. The other areas that we really tried to make progress, and that's structural deficits. Our crime victims services have a structural deficit of over 3 million. A significant portion of that would be the victims advocates that are in the state's attorney's office. So this year we said we are funding that network and those services on fines and surcharges, declining revenue source. And we said we really need to stabilize the ongoing funding. And so we moved, we allocated 2.5 million of base money to fund those positions that are in the state's attorney's office. There will be a separate line very clearly so we can monitor it. There was concern that, the state's attorney's office might not value the positions or fund them, but there's also a line for SIUs, so we use the same model of those positions. That would substantially address what has been an internal deficit. We also know that the way we set up the Cannabis Control Board, the regulatory board, the fees don't cover the cost of the program and the operation. And so the first, there'll be some language that deals with the phase-in because you may recollect that once we get up to full speed, that bill of that law provides for 30% of the excise tax revenues to be allocated to prevention. So we did put money in for bridge for prevention, recognizing that we're getting money from the OxyContin settlements that are coming into the state's attorney, into the Attorney General's office, as well as revenues that are coming in through that allocation in the cannabis program, and that program actually started operation to get set up and registering people first. The other area that had no funding, with all the emphasis on drug use and the concern about that, there was no money increase at all provided for our recovery centers, which really support, it's a peer-supported model to help people maintain sobriety, be clean and sober. And another area that we had a bill that came through and we stripped out the money, but I view very much in terms of prevention, and that is more money to our parent-child center network. You may recollect that we had a study done because Vermont brings more children into the state custody than other states, and we're an outlier in terms of that number. And one of the findings from the UVM study looking at is that Vermont has not invested as much in prevention as other states. And so there's actual language that talks about the parent-child center's critical role in serving families where children are at risk of coming in. And that once again is prevention, but it also ties into our problem with addiction and drug use, because many of those children have parents who are suffering with a substance abuse disorder. We have had, over time, we've been trying to make sure that we move pathways, which is the housing support program to all areas of the state. So we're adding another region, not that we've completely got a statewide system, but that would be into the Bennington area. We are also increasing the tobacco conservation funds. We got some additional money that will be moved up to $1 million. One of the other things that we did in the budget adjustment, you may remember, we reserved $20 million to redeem a bond and $5 million for the property management fund so that we could get rid of the note on the CAFR. The House wasn't willing to move as quickly, but now we are moving on that, taking the money that was in reserve. We will redeem a $20 million bond. It'll be done in August. That would have some impact on a little over 300,000 avoided debt service. In addition, next year, the following year, there would be a $6 million saving. And so what we do have is language to create the what is called the capital expenditure cash fund, and that would in the future, as avoided debt, would put those proceeds or those savings into that fund. We also have in here the changes to the municipal employees retirement system that needed to be made. And the other area that ties into retirement, and this is for the first time, we are actually setting up that pre-funding of our retiree healthcare benefit. And so some of the savings that we are experiencing because of the higher contributions of both teachers and state employees allow us, will help, but the first year it's rather modest, and then third year it will be taken care of. So we had to put in some money to start pre-funding those benefits. But that is a major step forward because we, up until now, have not been pre-funding the benefit. And these are for current employees for their health care benefits when they retire. We are still covering for those, the pay-go in the general fund. But to me, that's all part of getting our fiscal house in order. Maybe I should look at my script here. Probably I haven't covered everything. We also, in the area of structural deficits, we reduced the workers' compensation fund by a third. It was at $6 million. This gets it reduced by $2 million, or still we have $4 million. We also create an IT modernization fund, which to me is sort of like a excess receipts fund, because oftentimes when we're appropriating money for IT projects, there might be some left over, or there may be incentives to add more or allocate more cost to an IT project. We call it sort of creep. And so this would allow those, if there's excess, to stay within that IT arena and be used to fund future projects. There is language in here of looking at fees. We've not had fee increases in the last 5 years. We know that they represent a significant amount of revenue. Estimates are over 20 million. So it's to take a look at that. We know in the transportation area in particular, those fees are going to be particularly critical to help us draw down all the available federal dollars that are coming through the infrastructure bill. And so the other impact or expenditure that we experienced in the Senate that was not known in the House, and that is our direct care workers. And these are workers who provide direct personal care to people with disabilities or people who are, for example, our seniors. It's part of our home and community-based approach. But those workers unionized a couple of years ago, and so we had to recognize the increased cost of their salary, which I think if you look at other areas, it's still very low paid and very essential work that's being done to keep our most vulnerable in their homes. And that was all funds 4.5, but it was over 2 million, about 2 million in general fund cost. We were looking at SUD treatment and recovery, and there's a new program that got started, and it's really sort of like Jenna's house, and it's a system from scratch. It's the model that you would use. It looks at housing, employment, treatment, et cetera, and recognizing the fact that people relapse. So this program got started out of a tragedy, a loss of a talented young woman from a drug overdose. And so this is reflected in the base, but it's a 3-year commitment after which the program would be self-sustaining. We're also adding, we used to call it public inebriate beds, but I guess now it's sobering or sober beds. And up to 19 beds would be funded. We try to allocate them specifically, but to support more beds. And recovery centers, as I said, there was nothing to increase their budgets, and so we did the increase for them as well. We also know that there's been a great demand for our legal services, and we did not see that it made sense to attempt to do that with one time. Those are kind of ongoing services, and so we moved those into the base and included them. We also got a request for 3 clinics, and then we had a request from a mobile unit that is out of the University of Vermont, does blood draws and other monitoring. And so we felt that those were also part of our oversight and protection. Childcare, once again, you can see adult days are still suffering from low enrollment. 2 have actually closed last year. They haven't been reestablished, but they are really a critical component of our services to keep people in their homes. The dispatch, Senator Sears is not here, but we did release some money. We had gotten testimony that the current system is under a great deal of stress, and the other dispatch services, other than those operated by the Department of Public Safety, are getting a tremendous amount of forwarded calls. I think, if I remember correctly, Lamoille County, maybe 40% of the calls they were taking were in fact forwarded, simply because of the volume. And we have a system that is really under stress, and it's a critical system. If you call 911, you won't have somebody not only answer the phone, to have the dispatch function. So that is something that, and there may be an amendment, I'm not sure at this point. Our state college system, and I guess, I've quoted this before, and it's a promise made is a debt unpaid. Back a couple of years ago, when we had that, the news was breaking about this condition in the state system, a committee was formed, and we put together a plan to help transform and stabilize our state college system. The governor's proposed budget had $5 million, but in fact, the plan and the commitment required not only the $5 million, but bridge funding. And so what we have done here is focus on the transformation plan for this year. If we're going to say that this is a priority, it's critical to our workforce, it's critical to Vermont students, and we've got a plan to stabilize, we can't step back from our funding commitment midstream. That was, I will say, was the thinking and the priority setting on the part of your appropriations committee. You can see that. The Arts Council, they needed more match to draw down their federal dollars, and we wanted to support the arts. And then Pay Act has got to be funded as well. The other point that I would bring out is we funded more ARPA in the BAA. We actually put more money into critical occupations. I think it was about 8 or 9 million, so that students would know that they had the for next semester's course. So we moved that into the BAA simply because of timing. We also did more in workforce. So when the governor was developing his budget, he had about 85 million more ARPA dollars than we had, because we had used more of them when we built the BAA. So people are going to say, well, it was included in the governor's budget, or, the House included it. The only thing I can say is you can't spend the same dollar twice. I wish we could, but we can't. I haven't figured that out yet. But we, as a result of decisions made in the BAA, we were starting with a smaller ARPA box of funding. But we do have broadband, and what we're doing is using the 113 million capital ARPA dollars very clearly. 95 million for broadband. That's one of the specifically identified uses, so there's no question there. We're also, the money for libraries, it's almost 16 million for library support, and then some connectivity. So the full 113 million for capital will be appropriated. Water, we have 94 million. That is less than the House, but the House actually did not fund any economic development, and also did not fund any of the missing middle. And so there's some areas that we had already committed to that they had not. So we had to move some money down. Housing, this is once again, 70 million. And also to VHCB, again, there was a combination of funding. But we had to reduce by 10 million the money to VHCB, not to take it away from housing, but because we were using it for the missing middle, that home ownership. So that is kind of a run through of the budget that we have. The other thing, which is very small but important to a lot of people, we increased the personal needs allowance for people in nursing homes. It's pitifully small, and people were saying they didn't really even have it when we did it a couple of years ago. It was so low they couldn't afford postage stamps, or if they got a haircut, it would use it all. So we felt that that was important. They also, one thing that came up right at the tail end, which caught us all by surprise, and that was we were hearing from our housing agencies that DEC was reading the language that we put in the budget last year as requiring PCB testing. And we're all going, where did this come from? We only wanted testing in schools. I don't know the source, but there was language about release, and it became much more expansive. It was, and DEC was saying it applied to all other housing and buildings. And so if you've had a project just completed, a $15 million rehab in a historic building, to be told retroactively, you have to test. So it put us in a very uncomfortable position because we thought we were putting in language that clearly said we will test in schools. And we used the budget to do that. And to come back and say, well, this is really what this requires, took us all by surprise. And if in fact that's what the language did, and I don't know the source, I think it must have come from the agency. It really violates all our committee processes and transparency. And so we have an amendment that makes it clear that the testing, our intent was the testing for schools. And if we want to look at the whole issue around testing, there's language identify the issues, and we need to put it through the committee process, not attempt to put it through sort of the Pete the Moose approach that seemed to have been perhaps used last year. So some of us will remember Pete the Moose. I'm hoping you'll find there's no Pete Mooses, what it would be here. The other part that I would also mention is dual enrollment. We did take that language that addresses the court case around dual enrollment and allowing those students to have the advantage of dual enrollment and the funding at 75,000 ed fund and 75,000 general fund. The other parts of the bill as it relates to religious education, I don't know what the fate is, but I think there was agreement that we wanted to have the dual enrollment option available to all our high school students. So that's in there. Also the changes recommended by the Transportation Committee. The other body had actually reduced maintenance, and we're sort of like, maintenance is so critical, and we know that maybe short term, but the impact of deferred maintenance isn't a good policy. So we actually did not reduce maintenance. We did not fund, I'll be honest, we did not provide subsidies for e-ATVs and e-snow machines. And we did not do charging stations, as we called it in the wilderness, at forest and at parks or fishing. We wanted to really make sure that we were doing the network, and there's over $6.2 million in the T bill to do that, plus an additional $10 million in the ACD section for charging and multi-unit housing. And those areas, if a park or a fishing, it could come in under that other pot of $10 million for charging stations. But what we did do is increase the appropriation for VORAC, which is Vermont Outdoor Recreation, and felt that that was a better use than ATV and snow machine subsidies. And we also put more money into microtransit and public transit, which we felt from a climate perspective and the benefit of the number of Vermonters was much greater. So those changes made in the T-bill are reflected here as well. So I think at that point, I'm going to stop. You've got your documents. You can see the money and where we added more money. I think we were trying to say, how do we, our priorities were, of course, everybody would like to add something new. Everybody would like to expand something or whatever. And we were saying, we really want to focus on where are their commitments? Where are our essential services? How do we make sure that they're taken care of first? We didn't want to get into a position of saying, well, state colleges, we got to you at the end of the list and that's all we have. We wanted to say there are priority and we have to fund and work down. So committees, I know that there was a desire to spend more money. I was not being, to be honest, everybody says it's such a successful program because it's oversubscribed. And your budget was oversubscribed with many requests that have merit, but we didn't simply have the money. And so for the ARPA side, it was over 70 million, and for the general fund was over 40. And so we had to make some decisions, but I think we tried to use a structured process of prioritization and trying to make sure that we were addressing the needs and the most acute needs and work from there. So if you've got questions from the documents or anything, I'll just open it up. Gosh. Okay, Ruth and then Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Senator Kitchell. I think overall it sounds amazing, and thank you for you and your team's hard work. I have three small questions. The 4.9 million for childcare providers that's under the Maintaining Essential Services. Where is that in the big bill, and what specifically is that for?
That would be in child development. It's in DCF.
Is that the CCFAP?
Yes.
Or is it? Oh, it is CCFAP. Okay, that's what I. And then the first responder regional dispatch development. Did you maintain the language that was in the House bill about the task force? And I heard concerns
language
about
around study. Obviously, we've got to deal with a funding stream, but what it did was release money to set up, move on 4 of them. 3 seem to be ready to go. The 4th, which I believe is in the Rutland area, as a ways. So it was some are, and Senator Sears had quite a bit of conversation with that, where they're with the equipment could come online pretty quickly. And as I said, our goal was not to go through it was to provide a more immediate response, because what we were hearing was that we had an emergency response system and dispatch system that was pretty fragile, and people were worried that that it could, something serious could happen.
right, but it doesn't preclude other additional ones being put in the future. Okay, I heard concerns from my county about them being left out, but
our big problem right now is some towns are paying, and they're paying sometimes the sheriff's office, or it could be in Newport, I believe it's the local police department. Other towns are paying nothing, and they're going through the state police system. Those that are paying nothing, of course, would like to continue paying nothing, and those who are paying would like to pay nothing and get on to the other. And so it's just a very uneven system in terms of how it's evolved, and it needs to be rationalized. It also needs more redundancy. It needs more capacity than
and that's what the working task force, whatever it's called, is supposed to do. Okay. My final question is on the positions part of the budget, which you did go through, but in looking at it last night, I was wondering about the positions that were in S287, which is the pupil weighting bill. for AOE and what their fate was. I saw that there are a couple of positions for AOE, but not the positions that were in that.
Yeah, because I don't know what's going to happen on the House side, and we will have to accommodate it once we know what action the House is going to take. There had been some discussion that they were going to use, and you know this better than I do, that cost-based approach, which would not require the same level of staffing because of the different methodology.
It would actually probably require more staffing because it's a new way of funding it. So don't believe the hype.
I don't believe anything.
Okay, but there's still time to
Yes.
reconcile positions depending on what happens with that.
And there are a lot of positions. You will notice there are a lot of positions. Many of them are in Vermont Health Access. They're limited service. They're being converted to permanent. There's no additional cost, limited service. You still pay retirement, you pay everything. We had hoped with the new system that we could see some reduction in those positions, but we have not been able to do that. The only change that we did make, and because we were trying to free up money to put more, move the 7 to 8%, there were positions, 10 positions in Dale, and we said, look, on administrative level, we didn't approve those positions, those savings, but the nurse surveyors and the individuals that are out in the field working to protect our seniors in particular were funded. So but otherwise, there's a lot of limited service, and there are a lot of ARPA related because there's a lot of money that's moving through that has to be administered, and certainly grants and so forth do require oversight. They have to be reviewed and so forth. So I've never seen as many positions, to be honest, but I would hope that this administration would have vetted those pretty carefully in terms of what they're asking for. So Senator Ingalls.
Are we balanced, Senator Kitchell?
Balanced.
Okay, because no other funds later on down the road that we got to worry about. We're starting to hear grumblings that we're not balanced. So I just want to make sure that I can say with certainty that we're
Right
balanced.
here, look at the top, is balanced. And that's the other thing that becomes so important, and that is with all this federal money that's coming in, it has created a real frenzy, and we were getting requests for funding even as of the time we were marking up. And we had to be very vigilant, and I'll state this again, because our base, and this is something I will say, that the House budget, we actually did some more things in the House budget. I will tell you that. We funded that personal care, personal service attendance over $2 million. It had to be done. It was a contractual obligation. We wanted to move more money into the EA's, SSA system. Our mental health system is under a great deal of stress. So I'm working with our finance committee, said we can't reduce our available revenues and deal with some of these very significant issues like court security or like, well, the ones that I've laid out, if we don't have a bit more revenues. So I will be honest, this bill, it does stand about $13 million more than the House, but you start adding up things, 2 million here, it doesn't take very long before you're still having to make decisions. I want to make it clear that what they had passed a bill, a child tax credit benefit that had a $48 million price tag, and in the form of reducing revenues. And in our committee, I think the people in finance were recognizing that what we were attempting to do here. Now, should we shore up these critical programs? Shall we deal with some of these areas of underfunding? One of the things that we did agree with was try to reduce the not withstood transfer by $10 million to the HCD, because housing is certainly a big priority. So we we did say we need a bit more money if we want to make significant progress. And as I said, there were areas that require base funding that came up subsequent to when the House did, but they passed the bill that had the revenue reduction impact before they did the budget. So they had to build the budget within that framework. So it is balanced. Senator Lyons and
Senator Kitchell, first, I want to say that the budget as you presented it is really outstanding from the perspective of the Health and Welfare Committee. I do have a couple of comments and questions. One is regarding, first of all, the Department of Mental Health urgent care model that will be built is something that I've been particularly concerned about, and I think the committee as well. So that's refreshing to see. In terms of the mental health in the budget, will that, I'm going to have to go back and look at exactly what's in there and how that relates to H703, because mental health and social work, mental health master's folks are critically needed right now. So maybe we can chat about that later.
well, as I said, we did release $1.5 million specifically for the mental health field. They requested more. I think they wanted $6 million more. And I would have to say that I don't believe that there's a component of the workforce where there's not a shortage. When we're talking about, the line workers install the cable or for weatherization or education. I know our education committee is looking at a teacher shortage of about 1,000 teachers or something this fall. So there is money. One of the things about giving the base increase to those agencies, it gives them greater capacity to increase wages, make them more competitive, and to help deal with the vacancies. So, but in terms of how you want to allocate those tuition or scholarship dollars in those critical applications, that's the money is not here. It's going to be in 703.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And then the other question, of course, we've been working so diligently to move our resources toward prevention so that we don't have to deal with intervention, treatment, and recovery later on. I'm looking at the substance misuse prevention funding language, and just can you define what it means by unexpended, unobligated balance? Because this is a change. This is a significant change from the language that we had when we negotiated the cannabis bill. So will that include only the administration, board administrative funds?
I believe that's right. You're referring to the language we added so that fees don't.
Page 84 of the addendum. Yeah, no, it's related to the
A
board.
way of recognizing, yes, otherwise it would just all default to, it would create an internal service deficit that would balloon to over $7 million. So we were just trying to accommodate those costs for those startup period of time to avoid the creation of that internal deficit that would take quite a while to pay back. And I can defer to Stephanie Barrett if you want to expand on that.
So it's a 3-year construct where the excise tax would go into the board fund, and then we would direct apt out of the board fund to the general fund, still keeping 30% of that direct apt for prevention. So right now on the balance sheet, there is a little over $900,000 reserved for prevention. It gets to a much larger number in 24 because the excise tax is bigger. But what it allows is in that 3-year period, the board to not create a deficit, and then the pressure is on 3 years out whether the board stays as big as it is. But that's the construct. The excise tax would then go back into the general fund 3 years, and the same 30% is dedicated to prevention for 3 years on the direct app amount, and then after that 3 years 30% on the.
Yeah, that helps. Thank you. That's very helpful. Can I ask one last question?
You may.
All right. Obviously, you've talked a lot about all the added positions, and I'm very sensitive to adding new things. The Child Protection Oversight Committee did recommend two things. We recommended parent-child centers, and that's come through beautifully. We also recommended the child care advocate, and I know that's not included in the.
That's a separate bill.
Okay, so that will be considered separate.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's all I have at this point. Thank you so much.
And also for parent-child centers, we gave them $750,000 one-time money, knowing that obviously equipment and so forth is always capital needs. So there's in addition to the base increase. The food bank had asked for $6 million. We did increase it to 2. Don't forget, we've already given, I think, 6 or 7 million in the EAA, but there was language that constrained how the money could be used, and we removed that, so it doesn't come with that. Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Kitchell. Thank you for including the continued PCB testing. My question really is, what's our plan for remediation? And are we planning that for next year, or do we have any money anywhere for remediation?
No, we don't. We don't. And that, in fact, is something that our Senate Education Committee has been struggling with. And that is, they're just like we've had some extra money, one-time money, because of, you can't put $10 billion in the Vermont economy and not have it kind of distort your, revenues. And so there's a surplus in the ed fund. And the question really, should we start saying we need to set some money aside? Because right now it's just the testing.
Got it. So that's our discussion on the yield bill.
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly where that will occur. In terms of how you want it, and their needs are so great. Not only should it be PCB, but it could also be improvements or repairs to an existing building. We've heard of septic systems or sewer systems that aren't working. And so there's tremendous need. I know that there's a desire to expand benefits to, higher income kids for meals, but it's a debate in terms of where you want to spend those dollars. So that's where that would be occurring. Thank you. Other question? Oh, yes, Senator Pearson.
Thank you, Senator Kitchell. This is, I really appreciate these documents because it's easy to see what you've done. The first question, though, in front of us is your amendment compared to the House. And I'm wondering if we would expect this overview sheet with a comparison to the House budget, or there's nothing here that helps us just understand. Not that I would doubt your decisions, but it would be helpful to know the comparison, because I'm sure you haven't only been able to add and to make some changes.
That's really very difficult. I would say is economic development and workforce, because they did them in 2 bills, and so what we're going to end up there between the two, I think it's still going to be the subject of negotiation. But you're talking about within the budget itself.
Well, just usually we get a side-by-side of some
There's a web report that shows the changes the House made to the governor and the Senate, and that was just late getting printed. So Penny has that, and we can get that out to you now.
Send it out.
Oh, great. Thank you.
So that tracks through all the changes, starting with the governor's recommended House change, and then it's annotated as well.
Terrific.
So it should help walk through. But where you're going to see most of the changes are going to be, like, for example, in human services, where we put in the additional money for the DAs. And the other part is, it gets kind of confusing, but remember, we have a waiver, global commitment. So you're going to see some double counting, because every time you change something, it reflects in the Secretary's office, and then it's duplicated in the administering departments. So the minute you start making any of those changes on workforce, that was the other, it's going to show in multiple places.
But we can provide this information, which is the G section, the 5 major investment categories, House and Senate comparison. It just gets kind of complicated because some things are moving between general fund and as Senator Kitchell mentioned, the H-159 and the H-703 bill and the housing bill are all in different sort of positions in different chambers. So we can break that down.
The summary that is coming is helpful.
Okay.
Other questions? Then at 4 o'clock, we'll just say ditto and go. If you have any questions, please, if you can imagine it, keeping track of everything that we did with 8.2 billion is a challenge. That's why we tried to put these documents, because people are going to say, well, what did you do with this? Did you fund this? And so this kind of gives you that summary, depending on, is it general fund one time, is it ARPA one time? And then in the web report, you're going to see actually those base increases that we did as well.